Professor Satterwhite, and we're going to be talking briefly about the Great Gatsby. Right now, we're in the F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald Museum. You might hear some construction sounds in the background, so excuse us. But we can look around quickly just to see what a little bit of one of the rooms in the museum looks like. This is a house that the two of them lived in right before Zelda Fitzgerald was placed into a sanatorium in the early 1930s. But the two of them did live here as a couple, and they both wrote in this house. So I want to point out a few things. First off, here's one of the flyers, one of the posters for the film version of The Great Gatsby. After F. Scott Fitzgerald had written his book, The Great Gatsby, it had a certain amount of commercial success, but they tried to push it in various ways. It was slightly successful, but not as successful as he had hoped. And although F. Scott Fitzgerald had felt that the book was a work that could stand the test of time, that his publishers weren't necessarily into it as much. They pushed it with the silent film, which I understand has been lost now, but the film was out for a little while. They had other versions of this that also worked. So the film was lost, but the book still survived. The book was, although it was never out of print, it was still in print, but there was remainder copies that were lost in a warehouse for a while. Not really lost, but they were in a warehouse for a number of years. And it was rumored that Scott Fitzgerald would go around to a number of different bookstores in towns to try and find copies of the book, and the booksellers were surprised that he was even still alive, which is a sad commentary on his life, and also a sad commentary on the state of the book that he felt was very successful, or he felt was one of his greatest pieces, but unfortunately wasn't as commercially successful. But I wanted to show you this. This right here is a first edition of The Great Gatsby. And as I mentioned, it was nominally successful, but it wasn't as successful as he would like to have been. What made him very successful, very popular, sadly happened after he died. He died in 1940 of a heart attack at the age of 44. As you probably know, World War II started in 1941. So when the war started, there was a big call for troops to be able to have literature, to have books that could be sent to them. And there was a mass campaign to get as many books published as possible. And this copy right here is honestly the first edition, or first version of this book that I've ever seen. This is the Armed Services edition of The Great Gatsby. So if you can imagine all these troops going around Europe, going around some of the stomping grounds that he writes about in other texts, in places where he had lived, at least countries where he had lived. And now we're keeping this in their back pockets, keeping it in their rucksacks as they're marching through Europe, marching through World War II. And it was the copy of this book is what made it successful, and in part because so many people had read it. Once they read it, then they came back from the war, and then within a short period of time, this was such a well-known book that it was published and it was brought back into publication not long after, and then now, as you know, it's been taught in colleges pretty much ever since. It's sad for him because he didn't get to live to see the success that he knew was going to happen, or he felt would happen with the book, but that we're reading it right here is in part because of a lot of that history. So I wanted to show you that, and I just wanted to show you the space itself because we're in part of that history.